So hopefully everyone can see us today again on the topic. Today we're going to just have an open Q&A and just a dialogue about supplier-owned brokers. This is something that probably at one point was a rarity. I can remember, historically some of the earliest broker supplier tie-ups being almost kind of a controversial, certainly a conversation of maybe mutterings here and there in the industry. But today it's really become more mainstream. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. What are some of the pluses, some of the challenges that are out there? What is it like? Kind of inside of that, is the mentality different? Are there any lessons to be learned there? And maybe even looking forward to the future on what we might see in the industry. Really quick, just our agenda, cover some housekeeping. We'll get into a little bit of a longer intro. I'll ask both Tim and Svi to give us a couple of minutes on themselves and the background of their firms. We'll go into just a Q&A. We'll get 7 or 8 questions teed up, but we'll also look for Q&A, any questions that come in from the audience. And then we'll wrap up with any final thoughts and kind of a look forward to our next event. As you know, if you've been on an Enerex webinar before, we do these roughly monthly, usually kind of the last week of the month. Being a holiday weekend, we rolled this one forward into the first week of June, but thanks for joining us today. We do use the Q&A functionality. If you'd like to post any questions there, the panelists will be monitoring that, comment on other people's questions, etc. And then we do, I think we leave the chat open as well. I'm sure that Jason or Joe will be monitoring that. If there's any curiosities, if you have any challenges with audio or getting your setup working, feel free to email Joe here. Speaking of TIPA, I mentioned that briefly, but the Enerex team will be at TIPA in Boston. Tim and Svi, you guys planning to attend? Either of you guys in Boston coming up?
I still haven't fully recovered from New York, so I will not be in person at this one.
I think I may join.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I know at least Jason, Beck, and I will be there in Boston on the 21st. Look forward to seeing everyone. Boston is one of my favorite towns. I've probably traveled there the most of any town other than my hometown. And so if you need any restaurant tips, reach out to me. There's a great one, a great sushi place really close to the hotel. That's one of my favorites. So we've always been excited to participate in TIPA. It's one of the best forces for good in the industry that we have going for us, and a great place to meet people, to network, and to just kind of be a part of the conversation that carries the industry forward. Excited to see what we'll cover in Boston. As an intro to Anorex, and again, we won't go into an ad here, but just so you know who we are, in case you're joining us for the first time or haven't met us before, we are a B2B software as a service company. We provide software to both the broker and supplier side of the industry. We've been around doing this for some time, and we're the leading broker side platform in the industry by far in the US, with a little over 10% of US commercial and industrial transactions happening on the Enerex platform. We also have a CRM for suppliers and a way to connect suppliers and brokers so that you don't have to rekey all of your bids, rekey your price request, rekey your quote requests and pricing. Easy to get pricing together. We have portals. We have a commission solution for suppliers. And we've got some data and analytics and all sorts of things that can help the industry move forward. Ultimately, we're about connecting the industry so that we make the process of buying and selling energy in competitive markets easier. That's what we're all about, making it easy to buy and sell energy in competitive markets. And so that's why we like connecting people through technology. We believe in competitive markets 100%. We believe that technology is a key component of making markets work regardless. And we believe that energy marketing best outcomes for consumers. And so this conversation today, just to pull it back, is really about competitive markets, about the continuous evolution happening in competitive markets as we see acquisitions and mergers and new upstarts and all sorts of things going on. And so I'll just come back around to introducing Svi. Let me start with Svi, since you're first here on the slide after me. Tell us about Diversity. Tell us about kind of the story there, what you're doing as an executive vice president at Diversity today, how you guys sort of sit in the market, where you're focused, etc.
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Enerex and Nate for allowing me to participate on the webinar today. Really appreciate it. So I'm sure many of you may or may not know, but Diversity is owned. Today's topic is owned by a publicly traded company called Genie Energy. Genie Energy is a spinoff of IDT Telecom, which has been around for like 30 years. And the energy industry sort of deregulated similar to the way that telecom did. So they sort of figured it would be a nice segue to get into a new vertical. They started a company called IDT Energy, and then subsequently they spun off a new entity called Genie. Genie Energy is really a diverse company in terms of what they focus on, but overall, it's an energy company. They've been involved in oil exploration. We have a solar division. We obviously have our bread and butter, which is our supply business. Historically, it's primarily been a residential business, although in the past, I would say 5 or 6 years, they focused more on commercial. And about 7 or 8 years ago, Diversity was an acquisition. It was based in Texas at the time, and we've moved it since then up here to our headquarters in New Jersey. Diversity, like I said, has been around for many years, although maybe more people have heard about it now. We're sort of a little bit more out there these days, trying to really grow the business organically. So super excited to be here and be part of the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Svi. And if you don't know, we have our headquarters in the Princeton area in New Jersey, so always enjoy visiting our New Jersey customers. In full disclosure, Diversity is a customer of ours, so we're excited to have Svi. And in fact, before Svi was on the Diversity team, we've been working with the team there almost since the original acquisition, and so super glad to have a long-standing relationship there with the overall Genie management team. Tim, tell us about Energy Objective, kind of the Shipley ecosystem. It's a really interesting story of how Energy Objective and where you are today, and maybe even looking forward if you can.
Well, interesting is a strong word, Nate, but I'll do my best here. Shipley Energy is a 93-year-old, fourth-generation family-owned, historically oil company in York, Pennsylvania. So a couple of unique things about us. Probably most of the people who show up at TIPA or show up to a call like this don't have a very large footprint in the petroleum-based fuels. That's mainly the kind of company that we are. We entered the natural gas space in the late 90s and quickly became a supplier and had great success because we were one of the first suppliers in Columbia Gas and UGI in this territory. And then when they brought me on in 2009, they said, we want to get into electricity in preparation for Pennsylvania deregulating. So if you don't screw it up, it's yours. And so they gave it to me, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But we decided to enter the market as a broker. So originally, tantamount to the reason we're here today, we were a broker on the electricity side, a supplier on the gas side. Of course, we had like the rest of Shipley's 17 businesses over here. And that was kind of controversial enough. But they became frustrated in 2012 that they had all these residential customers they couldn't sell electricity to because it's difficult to broker electricity residentially. Not impossible, but we had no interest in that. So they said, go get another license and do that. So I started the residential side as well, just in time for the 2014 polar vortex. We got absolutely slammed, and that sort of created a revisit of our approach. And we decided we are going to be basically all things to all people. We're going to be a broker for natural gas and electricity in the C&I space, and we're going to be a supplier for natural gas and electricity in all three main sectors, but mainly residentially on the electricity side. And we're going to rebrand. We're going to kind of move Energy Objective's place as far away from the mothership as possible in the corporate chain, although it all eventually goes up to William Shipley III at the end of the day. And at the time, we were terrified. We were like, this was December of 2014, and I remember wondering like which suppliers weren't going to come along with us on this because it was just too controversial. And I'm not going to call out any names, but if I listed the names of the suppliers that we were really worried about losing, we'd all get a pretty good laugh based on recent events. And so, you know, it was like, can we really do this? It felt like so controversial at the time. You know, it turns out we were maybe just a little bit early to the idea.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, Tim, would you take a moment and tell us a little bit about what you're doing at TIPA? Would love to just hear, just if you wouldn't mind, a little commercial about the education committee. Always love to hear you speak at TIPA and tout what's going on with the education committee. And if you don't mind, just giving like a 30-second infomercial for that, we'll take a segue and we'll jump back into the supplier-owned broker.
Yeah. So education is a really important part of this industry, but TIPA has not really had a lot of success in getting a committee off the ground. And when we finally joined TIPA last year, Shannon McGriff, who runs TIPA, instantly identified me as somebody who could potentially run the education committee. And so I built a team for that, and we tend to present at basically every one of the TIPA conferences that I can make it to. But in addition, we're trying to build a platform to launch for 2023 to actually provide resources to the industry to not only help support each other and kind of lift each other up, and a rising tide lifts all ships, but also, you know, a lot of times the ones who are really ruining it for us out there in this business are the ones who are telling the customer the wrong things. Granted, they might be fully educated and intentionally telling the customer the wrong things. That's outside of my purview, but at the very least, I can make sure that we all understand the basic rules of this thing. And you know, it would have an audience of both brand new entrants into the market, because I don't think that the Enerdynamics and the PGSs of the world have a really good customer facing broker solution for education. I just don't think it really exists. So we had to build it in house here at Shipley. But also it could be for people who have been in the market for a while. So for example, at the Philly event in February, I did my chart of the PJM price, and just kind of did a quick presentation on the four main components that make up a price of PJM.
I loved how you did that with the quiz show style. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah, we did a quiz show in New York where we basically would just bring up unsuspecting victims and ask them questions about various topics in energy. And if they got it right, they got a certain amount of points. If they got it wrong, they got a certain amount of sass. And, you know, it was just a fun way to kind of mix it up to reinforce the value of education, and how, as consultants and brokers, we have a base level of responsibility to know a certain amount for our customers. And a lot of times it comes back to that same thing, policing ourselves before somebody else does it for us. The energy, even after as long as we've all been doing this, is still kind of the wild, wild west as far as what's expected of all of us. If we could raise each other up to a higher standard. Right now there is an EMP test, but there's only one level of it. And in my opinion, it's relatively easy. If we could multi-tier that and we could make it more difficult and have that be the gold standard, and eventually someday actually have customers say, look, if you're not an EMP, or if you don't have a certain level of certification with TIPA, I don't really want to talk to you. Like, I think that's a lofty dream, but it would be one that I think would make anybody, the kind of person who would be interested in a webinar like this, or who'd be attending TIPA events, that's the kind of person who would benefit from that sort of qualification, and getting rid of kind of the lower tier of people who are out there, because there's so few barriers to entry in this business.
So fantastic to hear about that. I think when you think about a future world where people who are active, driving awareness, on the front lines, deeply knowledgeable, can stand out as differentiated in the marketplace, I think that's a good marketplace. That's something that I would want to be involved in. So really excited that you're carrying the torch on the good deeds for the industry. And possibly one of the things that might come from being a part of a parent company that is in the energy business is that depth of knowledge, that depth of that bench strength, if you will. Many brokers are a long way from a supply desk and sort of understanding the physical realities, right, of serving load beyond just the contracting process, right? The actual procurement, pricing, and product selection. Term. Not to say that's a lightweight aspect, but I think part of maybe one of the benefits of the broker-owned supplier is just that closeness to the desk that's serving load, that's hedging, that's managing the risk, and managing the physical delivery on the gas side. If you haven't heard our gas webinar from a couple months back, really, really insightful. And another kind of interesting, Tim, you talked about how you guys entered as an electricity broker and gas supplier, kind of joint combo originally. We had M&R, which is another kind of local New York-based, New Jersey-based gas supplier that also brokers on the electric side. So, there's precedent even around that and some other examples. But we talked about the complexities that come on the gas side in terms of the physical nature of a gas product and how that brings some knowledge maybe to the broker world that isn't pervasive. Not everyone has that knowledge, and that one of the things that Menard talked about was the benefit of having the ownership of that responsibility of delivering and managing that physical gas helps them in the conversation. Would you say that you've seen that?
Well, yeah, I've kind of been able to see the ugly underbelly of a lot of this, because when I started, I was doing natural gas nominations and scheduling for the supply side. And then, of course, when I started the residential business, I had to learn all that from scratch, pretty much, like how to get the PJM membership and how to get the EDI relationships with the different utilities, and then partnering with an asset manager so that we could look at our costs each month and how it all ties up. I think that it definitely helps from a knowledge perspective to understand all that sort of thing, but we also have to remember the customer doesn't give a damn about all that sort of stuff. So where I sort of get frustrated sometimes with suppliers or the way that suppliers can bill sometimes is when whatever the customer perceives as relatively flat and predictable and vanilla in a contract, especially a gas contract, it's like, well, this month we had all these OFOs and we had all these exceptions and we had all these other reasons why your bill looks absolutely nothing like what it should look like. And that empathy of like, well, I understand what it's like to work, how hard it is, at a pricing desk, like that, there's some value there, but also we're not really in the business of empathizing with how hard it is for the supplier desk. We're here for the customer. So
I think your cost is not my problem. It's a question of value rather than
how hard your job is not my problem. We have a contract. And so that is something that, if anything, I've been happy to remove myself from as much as possible.
Fantastic. Well, let me pivot us back. I know we had an order of questions. We're actually going to come back around to that sort of positives and negatives of having a supplier as your parent. But let's talk about maybe the elephant in the room, which is this idea of preference or this idea of confidentiality. Is the relationship as arm's length as it appears? I remember when I think Engie was probably the first big name supplier to acquire a broker with the Ecova deal. When you think about the tie-up, and I'm using the word broker. Let me just sort of say that as some context, and that's a word we use sometimes to mean a specific thing in this industry, and sometimes we use it as sort of a catch-all, from consultant to aggregator to broker. We really mean someone who's representing customer interest in procuring energy services, and it may or may not just be limited to retail supply. And I know that there's a spectrum of that out there. We certainly serve quite a spectrum of different folks. So I'll apologize in advance today when I say broker. I'm using the collective catch-all term. And I know that Ecova was a lot more than just a broker, and I don't want to pigeonhole anyone into anything, but I'm just using that as a term of convenience for today. So back to the question, a lot of people got nervous, hey, if I call the supplier that owns a broker, how safe is my customer data? Will I be able to, what if they don't win? Will they hand that lead off to some, people worry about this with a direct sales team, but just as the same kind of worry on a broker, which is, they're going to give my prospect data when they don't win. Are they going to go give that to their sales team, and I'm going to run out into them in the marketplace? How do you guys feel about just the overall kind of data security, sharing around price data is a big thing, and then also just kind of customer data? Maybe Svi, why don't we jump over to you and let you jump in?
So, I definitely a valid question that comes up. And before I was at Diversity, I actually worked on the supplier side for many years, built the commercial business for Genie. And I had brokers asking me all the time, how does that, how does that work? And pretty much 100% of the time we were able to get over it. I can only recall one time when a broker actually gave me a hard time about it, but we got through that too. It's definitely a valid question. I can't speak generally about, other companies. I could just say, at Genie, we really are two separate companies, even though we're owned by the same parents. We happen to be in the same building, different sides of the building though. And being that I'm in it, and I see how no information is given back and forth. So it's sort of harder for me to relate to people that have that concern, because I'm in it and I see that there's absolutely no data that's shared back and forth. But on the other hand, I understand the concern, and it's sort of just, a trust thing. Like, you got to build trust with your partners and your agents and your salespeople and whoever you're working with, so they feel comfortable that there is no, any under the table business. I'm happy to say at Genie, Genie, there's really absolutely no sharing of data. I just wanted to touch upon one thing that's sort of, relevant to this though. We sort of take the good and leave the bad. So the good is, we are owned by a supplier, and like Tim and you were both mentioning, there's a wealth of information. We're pretty close to a price desk when we need it. And I feel, talking about, like Tim was mentioning about education, I feel a lot of the guys out there selling today are not educated. Like, people don't even know, like, what capacity, transmission, load factor is, and I have to break it down for them. Being that I worked at a supplier and was so involved in the pricing, I've sort of learned that over the years. But, from that aspect, I think it's a tremendous value that a broker that's owned by a supplier can offer versus a broker that isn't, just because of their depth in the industry. So yes, there are some concerns about data sharing. I just recently had a conversation with a supplier, and he brought it up, and I asked him, why do you bring it up? Are you concerned? He's like, no, I'm not concerned. I'm just curious. So I think it's more of a curiosity than a concern. But like, in my experience over the past 11 years, I've never had an issue with, anybody not wanting to do business because of relationship. And to the contrary, it's helped us, I believe, just because of that close connection to a supplier.
Fantastic. Tim, you want to circle back on kind of the same topic?
Yeah, I would say that the kind of the walls that Svi was talking about are really healthy and definitely can make for a good situation. I think that the main thing that I would want as a broker working with a supplier who's doing both, or a supplier working with a broker who's doing both, is to know that the same person can't just take off their hat hour by hour and decide, no, now I'm on the supply side, now I'm on the broker side. Like, personnel wise, there probably should be a pretty solid split there. Like, this is 2022, so we're not going to expect they're in different buildings, or they're necessarily in different. Right. Like, there's certain things that just aren't going to happen as far as separation. I think the people separation is the most important part, because that's where I've seen some examples from competitors in the past where there was a utility affiliate that had a supplier, and the main person there even decided that he was also a broker. Like, basically, if he didn't like his supply pricing, he would just go out and get pricing from other, and he would like make a very modest change to his name that still very much had the name of the utility in it, just to sort of reinforce, like, he was just all things to all people. And that is exactly what I think people are gun shy about. So I think it's the most important thing is personnel. As far as the data sharing, I think that what keeps that in check is it's very difficult to survive in this market without brokers. I mean, the share that's, if you look at a Young Kim survey, that the share of this market that's held by ABCs, it was probably 65% 6 years ago, and whatever the number is, it just keeps getting higher and higher. It's probably,
I think it's 80 something today. I mean, that's the number that I have in my head. Yeah.
If you want to be a supplier who's in the business of burning brokers, of saying, oh, this looks like a good lead, I think I'm just going to take this from you, then you're not going to be in the broker business very long. So
yeah, how many chances do you get on that, right? That story gets out, that'll be the end. Yeah, for sure. There's a good group. So there's so one of the takeaways is there's kind of community accountability here. You burn somebody in the community, you're not going to go very far, right? We're all meeting once a month at these TIPA meetings at EMC and all the other kind of industry trade functions that we all get to. It's a small world, and I think when there are bad actors or bad acts, they get out pretty quickly. and circulate. So there's good visibility, at least from insiders, as people who might be, taking that in a different direction. Another thing is we were thinking about, how to craft this panel and who would be some good voices on it. You mentioned there's another kind of model out there, which is the utility-owned broker that has its own kind of wrinkles from a data perspective and that kind of thing. We've seen PUC filings around that, in some states where other suppliers have taken offense that a broker potentially leveraging the utility's name, right? Some of the same kind of concerns that early deregulation days had of incumbent suppliers, right? Which is the brand is so strong, there's a high likelihood of customer either confusion or just sort of innate affinity that creates a competitive disadvantage. And ultimately, what we want in a good competitive market is everybody's on a level playing field, at least as far as they want to work for the customer to earn that business. So it's really been interesting to see. We have some customers that are owned by utilities, and some in a sort of conglomerate where utility owns a broker and a supplier, but one's in gas and markets. And I think the reality that is that as I started the panel today is that whereas once this was a strange occurrence, something that was novel. I think now you run down the list of suppliers from largest market share down, and maybe 8 of the top 12 own ABCs, own brokers, and so, or at least someone who's not a supplier, may I say it that way. They're participating in the market in different ways and serving customers in different ways. And so it's really not, Constellation, NG, Vistra, NRG, Jexa, Nextera, Spark recently just with VIA, broker book and are running a broker. So, JE, Marathon, Eligo has Ion. So many suppliers have ABCs affiliated with them. We saw it with Mint some years ago. If you can remember that brand, but where either they're sort of cousin companies, kind of like Speed's describing, it's not necessarily the supplier is the parent, but sometimes both owned by the same holding company, where there's a common parent. You're not really affiliates other than through common ownership, right? Versus a direct parent subsidiary. And I think that's probably the case in a lot of cases. So to just dispel the myth that this is a rare thing or uncommon in the industry, but it's actually.
Well, one thing I will add is I definitely don't see an issue with like salespeople. They don't have any issues. I mean, there really isn't any issue, but they definitely don't have any issues with the common ownership between, like, maybe they can think, well, you're going to try to push all my deals towards your own supplier. They're in the driver's seat, so. If they think they're a better supplier, their choice, they don't mind.
Right. Ultimately, that tie is not changing a decision of someone of what a customer is gonna make a choice on.
Right.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, this kind of takes us to the next question, which is Tim. This is a phrase from you, but the name salad. Like, I think this whole idea around brand. I think it's one of the push and pulls that we see in the industry between brokers and suppliers, not in an unhealthy way, but in a very natural way, which is, whose customer is this? Is it a shared customer? Is it your customer? Is it my customer? And I think that's an interesting narrative and probably one that doesn't have a specific right answer. Or maybe all of them are right answers, depending on how you look at the answer to that question. But how do you guys go about maintaining a distinct brand with a larger parent or just a number of logos out there? So why don't we start with you, and then Tim, I think you've got also some really interesting here because you guys also did a recent acquisition in the last year. So have yet another brand.
How do we maintain our brand? So, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, we definitely, are a small pimple in the larger family of businesses. So to that, definitely always that emotional struggle, like, hey, don't just write us off. But
within your own company.
What do you say?
You mean within your own company?
Within the own company, yeah. I mean, like,
So that's
there's so much
interesting.
going on.
There's the internal conversation around brand and relevance, and then there's also the customer conversation. So that's interesting to kind of talk about the internal conversation.
Are you asking specifically about the customer or an internal brand?
I think branding is both, right? So there's no. I think both of those are part of brand relevance. So yeah, continue. Like you were saying. So first of all, it's sort of like just validating the materiality and the importance of diversity within the broad. Obviously, Genie's a very diverse company, as you were saying. Offshore Israel oil and gas that they've done. They just got into some financing lines of business and doing different things.
Solar. But overall, I don't know for sure, but I don't think there's a lot of connection between diversity and Genie in the outside world, like from a customer's perspective.
Right.
Up until now, we try to be, I think, like externally, we try to be careful about that connection. Although, while we're talking about it, I don't really see, if anything, it adds more value and more, respect. You're owned by a publicly traded company. People respect that more. People, these days, brokers come and go. You want that financial stability. You want to make sure they're going to be around. You want to make sure they have the depth of the organization. If there's other needs and other management needs, especially now that, we have solar and we have some other products. So, I think for me personally, I think our issue is more making ourselves stand out in the larger Genie family, more so than externally. I think externally, diversity is a pretty standalone brand. Again, and specifically in the commercial space in general, Genie wasn't particularly, so deep into the commercial space up until a few years ago. And even now, it's not like a Constellation or like, an NG where they're very focused on commercial. So I think diversity has its brand recognition in the commercial space outside of the Genie branding, but more so internally is how do we make a bigger impact to the bottom line of the overall company.
Perfect. And Tim, you guys recently did a deal, I should say. Shipley acquired Likens and Likens Energy Advisors. Actually, that was an interesting deal. World Fuels bought part of their company, and then Shipley bought part of it, and then there was a supplier and a broker, bringing some more logos, some more brands into the overall Shipley portfolio. How do you kind of, as Energy Objective and in the broader portfolio of Shipley, how do you guys kind of think through this overall branding exercise?
Very poorly for the most part. I think we've really kind of written the book on what not to do as far as having a strong brand when you're also benefiting from the fear back in 2014 that what you were doing was inherently bad. So like Energy Objective, for example, had its own website, while Shipley Energy also had its own website. And the Shipley Energy website received, 98.5% of the attention. And it was just very difficult to keep the Energy Objective page going in a way that it could really keep up with the times when all of Shipley's resources dedicated to Shipley branding things. The shirt I'm wearing right now says Shipley Energy. Starting July 1st, I'm going to
rep the brand.
I'm going to be running both the Ohio side, Likens Energy Advisors historically, and the PA side, Energy Objective. But I don't think I'm out of school to say we will very likely be combining names, and probably the main name that we're considering at this point is Shipley Energy Advisors. So like moving slowly away from the fear of 8 years ago and saying we're just going to fully embrace the fact that there's Shipley Energy and there's Shipley Energy Advisors. And every once in a while, Shipley Energy will be the best fit as a supplier, but that's generally, history has very much borne out that that is not the case. And the commissions that we write from one side of the building to the other side here are, we were just joking this morning about how small they are. Like most of it, we're pretty well diversified, but most of it comes from other suppliers.
Sure.
We need to kind of come back to the mothership as far as branding, because it's been a constant source of pain that, we had somebody in marketing who was dedicated only to commercial. And I would sit down and talk about the needs of Energy Objective. And finally, he got to the point where he said, look, I don't work for Energy Objective. I work for Shipley Commercial. And like it was that clear that this is something that we do because we feel that we need to in order to keep our noses clean. But now that like basically the last few years and those 8 out of 10 examples or 7 out of 10 examples you just gave basically made it so that this isn't that much of a thing. I mean, for a while, wasn't NG going by NG and NG Insights? Right now it's NG Impact or whatever. Like they're embracing it. And so I think that's the direction we're going to lean to. And I think it's really going to help with the branding side, because most people don't know what the hell energy objective is, and I can't really blame them for it. And I love our logo, but again, I'm not wearing it right now. I'm wearing a Shipley shirt, and it was a nice 8 years, but I think we're very likely, a month from today, my signature is probably going to say Shipley Energy Advisors.
Fantastic. Well, I think I'm really glad we talked on this question, because I think it's one of the unique things. You can also just see the evolution. You pointed out, Engie is certainly an evolution of brand story. You could probably write a paper from the GDF Suez days to where Engie is today as a global brand. Obviously, a beautiful, well-architected global brand, but you look at how they've evolved over the years and their long history. I think any long-running company has to ask this brand question over time and say, who are we, and does our brand reflect who we want to be in the future? To our, who's our customer? What messages are we sending? And so, how do you tie all those messages together? The parent brand with sub brands, or do you go with distinct messages and distinct brands? There's always going to be pros and cons there. Svi, you had something else to jump in there?
No. I mean,
okay.
On this topic.
Sorry, I thought I heard you.
I mean, I always have something to add, but you keep going.
Well, we've covered this a little bit, kind of pros and cons. Why don't we look at direct sales team? Now, there's always going to be a direct sales team at a supplier. Some suppliers it's very small. Some suppliers it's really significant. And I wouldn't say that varies with market share or size. It kind of just depends on the philosophy, how they address the market. And this has always been a question just for external brokers in the direct sales team. And I think the question here is anything different when you've got a broker in-house in a sense, or in the group, in the overall umbrella? Is there any conversation with the direct sales team, or any competition or dynamic there that would be interesting?
I mean, it's actually interesting that, I was talking to Direct Energy. I don't think this is private. I mean, it's sharing it openly. I was talking to Direct Energy 2 days ago, and she was the rep that we have there. A lot of the reps there do both indirect and direct. And she was and I was asking like how she juggled, between the two, and where she sees the market going. And she was telling me more so now than ever, her direct book of business is sort of shrinking, and like what you guys were talking about before, it's sort of all becoming indirect at this point. So, and a lot of suppliers don't even, I mean, from my experience, don't even really have a direct sales team. I could say Genie for sure doesn't have a direct sales team. And I think more and more it's becoming less common, my personal opinion, because I mean, people don't want to just be stuck with one supplier only. They want to see options. They want to see other products, other services, perhaps. So when you bring in a broker, you broaden the opportunity for the customer. It's an easier sell. I know, Constellation, I know still has a lot of direct sales folks in certain areas, but in general, I think it's moving towards the indirect team. So, here personally, we don't have that issue. But I think in general, I think it's becoming less of an issue because, at the end of the day, brokers are going to be the bulk of the sales, where most of the customers are signing to.
You might even argue that the trend of supplier on brokers is an acknowledgement of the point you just made, which is that customers want to be served by independent, right, energy advisor that's addressing more than just retail supply increasingly, but an overall energy need. And it might be that the sales channel is evolving to really be that as the preferred way that customers are demanding. Tim, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that there's very little perceived threat there, because the messed up thing is that the main way that our supply desk gets business is from my competing brokers. So that's like the main way that they get it. So they don't have that much of a direct sales force. Almost everything that they get is either legacy from like 15 years ago, or it came in through one of my competitors, which drives me crazy, hurts my soul. But basically, I just try not to pay attention to that part of the business, and that is what it is. But I would say that the main issue that derives from this is there's a lot of knowledge on the supply side that the broker side could really benefit from, and they'll maybe this is more of just a human nature thing, but they'll be like, look, we'll give you the 3-sentence answer that you're looking for, but we're not going to spend an hour diving into your issue with your customer and helping you figure out why this competing gas suppliers contract says this when it really means this. It's like, if we're not the supplier that's going to ultimately win this deal, that's just not where we want to put our resources, which I guess is the answer that most people on this webinar would want to hear. Like, it is actually fairly siloed in that way, but it just seems like a waste of, it's like, look, we all work for Bill Shipley at the end of the day. Like, could you help me out here, try and get this deal done? And so in that way, it's not even so much of a threat, but more of a time suck. Like, hey, I'm not going to spend my time on the broker side of the business if we're not seriously considered as going to be the winner here. And in many cases, they're not going to be, just because it's so, it's so competitive. What I also find interesting is when we are trying to have a conversation with a customer about why we should be their broker consultant. And they basically, especially in the case of mergers and acquisitions, they're like, well, it's going to be these guys. This is who we've worked with forever. This is who our parent is telling us we have to work with. But then they almost look at the fact that Shipley also has a supply division as like their consolation prize. Oh, but we'll make sure that Shipley's on the bid list. It's like, so like that. So basically you're saying, I'm going to be your number one boo. So like, I'll call you when I'm in the 717 zip code and maybe we can get together. Like, it is completely different. And then you're literally just competing on price. There's no strategy. There's no relationship. There's no year after year. There's nothing there.
Right.
So that's more like, it's less of a direct supplier competitor threat, and it's more of a seen as from the customer standpoint, when they decided to give us the kiss off on the broker side, it's like, well, but I'm not giving you a total kiss off, and I feel good about myself. And it's like, but you are really. That's what's really happening.
Wow, fantastic. Well, let's wrap up on this one, which is about growth. What are your growth strategies? And so if you could just pull up your strategic plan and paste it on the screen. No, but in all seriousness, you think about how does a broker, part of a much larger company, think about growth maybe differently than, say, an independent broker of the same size, right? Your balance sheet, let's say, a lot of brokers don't really have a balance sheet. They've got their checking account, and that may be a great. They may be very profitable. Not to say they don't have scale, but you're not owning assets, right? Fleets of trucks in the heating oil business, oil and gas properties, receivable balances like you might have in a supplier. You guys are backed by material financial backers. Do you look at growth in a different way? And Tim, we've seen recent acquisitions from you guys. Zvi, I know that you guys are always have your eyes open. Genie's a very creative and entrepreneurial business, even though it's publicly traded company, remains that entrepreneurial spirit. How do you guys look at growth?
I'll start this time. So historically, with the heating oil business, the only way you grow is through acquisition. There's no organic growth in the heating oil business, and you might even make the same argument about propane, even though that's still a growth market, just because of, especially regionally, it just gets so competitive. So I will, at the risk of throwing my strategic plan out there, our number one priority right now is just merging the cultures of Energy Objective and LEA, the PA side and the Ohio side, and making sure that we're maximizing resources on both sides. I'm going to quintuple my direct reports here pretty soon. So that's going to be a challenge, but basically making sure that we're not leaving anything on the table. LEA historically went after very big customers that were very complicated and make me very jealous. Energy Objective pretty much took all comers all the way down to the hair salon. And we're sort of like crossing streams where the Ohio side wants to really dedicate towards trying to get those one-call closes in those smaller customers. And I want to, of course, pivot more on the larger customers and focus on those. But basically, whether you call that growth or just sort of like, shoring up the home turf, that's definitely priority number one. Number two is that the reality is that even with both Energy Objective and LEA, natural gas and electricity, and even with the supply side, natural gas and electricity is still a very small focus overall with Shipley. In fact, quite frankly, commercial is still a relatively small focus overall. We're a residential oil and propane business at the end of the day, and we need to find better ways to capitalize on those relationships, obviously within severe geographic limitations. Like, if you don't live within 100 miles of where I'm sitting right now, I am no threat to you when we talk about those cross sells, because you can only deliver to your delivery territory where your trucks can get to. But we have never fully capitalized on some of those relationships that we could cross sell, and that's the biggest room for organic growth. But then after those two things, we have to really have some hard conversations about what organic growth looks like, because through simple mergers and acquisitions, customers closing down, especially in a post-COVID high inflation world, and customers going solar and with other types of DG, like, you can lose 10% of your book every year fairly easily through no fault of your own. Through a single avoidable loss, you can lose 10% of your book. So to grow organically, you have to replace that first before you really grow. And there have been some, in-depth and sometimes heated conversations about the best way to do that, here within Shipley. And if the answer is ultimately, well, this is a broker-based business, so, the broker side that I'm going to be running is just going to kind of nose to the grindstone, but the supply side is just going to really, really rely on brokers. It's like, okay, well then let's put the resources into making that side of the business stronger and maybe even having better relationships with those brokers, which I want nothing to do with that side. And I'm going to make sure there's a wall between that. But, that's an area to improve too. So I would like to think that organic growth can happen when a market hasn't opened up for the last 12 years and that it's still realistic. I do think it's extremely challenging in our industry.
Thanks very much. Sweet.
Yeah. So, I've been at Diversity for about a little over a year now. And, in my mind, we're still in the beginning stages of organic growth. I think we've been flat for, a number of years and really starting to ignite the engines here to pick up our pace. And, thank God over the last year, we've definitely seen a significant, increase in deal flow. And so I think there's a lot more meat on the bone in terms of organic growth, getting more salespeople, however we do that. And so, that definitely is a large piece of our path forward. I think, M&A is a big piece of it too. We're constantly talking to smaller brokers that are either looking to get out of the daily grind of pure procurement and looking to get into more sustainable type, opportunities, or just it's a very cash intense business. It's a grind broker business. So some of these guys want to get out, and being owned by a publicly traded company, thank God we have plenty of capital to to go around. So it's a little bit of M&A. We haven't done one recently, although we're always talking and looking. A lot of organic growth and just picking up the pace. There's a lot, like I said, a lot more meat on the bone there. And then, I think overall, the industry is moving away towards the plain vanilla generic procurement. And you got to eventually keep up. People like Tim said are going solar. So for us, we have our own solar division, which again, it's a separate entity, but we cross sell it all the time. As a matter of fact, I just recently sold one of my own customers solar. So I think that's also super important. So solar, energy management, demand response. A lot of suppliers now are getting into demand response. NextEra has a program. Freepoint is getting into it now. So coming up with new services is also, I think, the third bucket of where growth can come from. So a lot of organic growth, M&A, and then just expanding our product offering to help with bottom line, top line revenue.
That's a great point. And another one of the positives of having the larger parent company is you have other divisions who potentially have services that present cross.
Yeah, and community solar is also a big thing now. I mean, people don't realize that you can make more money on community solar than a procurement deal in a lot of cases. So we also have a community solar division. Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, we do. Go back. It's maybe 8 months ago or so. We did a webinar on community solar, and I think
it's still very fragmented. I'm not going to say the industry is super, but
it's not super simple. But if you're in the right place, it can be a good offer,
right?
And also for the right type of customer, there can be a good play there. People with bad load factors that can't get a good retail price, they get a guaranteed savings product. So it's a different value proposition, for that customer. So missed opportunity by a lot of people. Well, listen, coming up on time here, I just want to say thank you guys so much. I know that this is because of I'll say stigma, I think probably undeserved stigma, but certainly, and certainly fading stigma as we discussed today. I don't really think there is a stigma in reality, but maybe the fear of stigma. A lot of people could be bashful to talk about the relationships between different related organizationally, but independent operating, independent value proposition companies that really is more and more common. In fact, as we started, I'd say the list of the top 10 or 12 suppliers that don't have brokers is actually shorter than the list of those who do today. So if that's any indicator of the direction or the overall posture of the industry, people are definitely leading forward into the broker umbrella, meaning someone serving customer who's not sending them a monthly bill. Maybe I just sort of put that out there. It's not just retail supply. And I think that's maybe the other
Nate, just to add one point on that, just
go ahead.
When from a supplier view, right? They're making 3-4 mils on a deal, wearing all the risk. It's like a no-brainer for them to get into the broker business, make the same 3, 4, 5 mils, and wear none of the risk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's you know, it's an intriguing proposition to get into the broker business. Like, why not?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, I think the time yet has to tell whether the largest brokers in the industry are not owned by suppliers. I mean,
True.
Certainly NG started very early. Ecova was also a roll-up from without going too far down memory lane, a number of other large brokers from 20 years ago that sort of got acquired up into Ecova and then sort of joined the NG portfolio. And so they've had a long time to aggregate and build up that business and have done an excellent job with it. But most of the supplier brokers are smaller maybe and growing, or new entrants, or fairly recent initiatives. So I'll agree that it's a compelling proposition. I think time will tell. Can a big company execute on what is dominated by really a small and mid-sized operation? You don't see large corporate national brokers that are just that business as a standalone. You see them as part of other companies, you know, the Schneiders of the world. They do a lot more than just brokerage. You know, Anorex, a large ESCO and integrator, also having a big C&I broker. But we'll see. So I think this is really why this topic was exciting to go through today, just sort of wade into. One is sort of the taboo nature of it, and two is just it's an emerging trend that everybody's looking at and saying, hey, how's that going to work? And you know, will this bring some interesting wrinkles into the tapestry of the industry? And with that, let me just flip over and say upcoming events that we would love to see you at. We talked about the Boston TIPA conference. Next month, we're going to have our webinar, or I should say this month. As I said, this is really the May webinar that we rolled into the first week of June. But at the end of June, we will have we're going to have a webinar on ESG. This is another kind of interesting topic. It's something everyone is speaking about. You know, it's going to appear on Tim's education quiz. You're going to have to say, what does ESG stand for? Recently, Elon Musk says that it's completely blown out of proportion. And here's the guy running the largest electric vehicle company, one of the wealthiest guys out there, if not the wealthiest guy, saying ESG is overblown. So we're going to unpack some of that commentary and how that sort of flows down into competitive energy markets next month. Would love to have you. Please join us next month. And I'll just say a final thanks. Thanks to Tim. Thanks to Zvi. Thanks to both of your companies for allowing you to be here today and talk about this really interesting topic. And stay tuned. We'll be back with another webinar next month.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Great. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.